Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. Today we're going to be counting down my top 10 favorite episodes of Seaquest Dsv. For those of you who are not familiar with the show, Seaquest was a series that ran in the mid-90s for about 3 seasons and is set in the early 21st century where mankind has colonized the oceans. It follows the crew of a submarine known as the Seaquest, led by Captain Nathan Bridger, played by the late great Roy Scheider, to keep peace and explore the last frontier on Earth, the ocean. This video is essentially a follow-up to my retrospective that I did on the series where I talked a lot more in depth about it. And as I always point out with my other top 10 lists, it's important to remember this is just my personal list of top 10 Seaquest Dsv episodes. So coming in at number 10, we have Brave New World. This was the first episode of the third and ultimately last season of Seaquest, where they actually slightly rebranded the name of the show from Seaquest Dsv to Seaquest 2032, where they actually jumped ahead in time by about 13 years. This episode honestly does a pretty good job of wrapping up the cliffhanger from the previous season, introducing Michael Ironside as the new main character as Captain Oliver Hudson. They kind of set up a slightly more serious tone as compared to the previous season, and overall I just thought that this episode did a really good job of slightly reinventing it, but whilst also keeping a lot of the previous elements as well. And yeah, I personally thought this was a really great start to what could have been a really great new direction for the series had it not been cut short. So that's Brave New World at number 10. And then at number 9, we have Equilibrium. Roy Scheider apparently had a pretty rough time on the show. Apparently he initially did not like the direction that the second season took. So when it came time to do the third season, he tried to essentially renegotiate his contract. He essentially wanted to just be done with the show. He wanted to move on to other things, but they had him on a 3-season contract. So basically they ended up kind of coming to a middle ground where he would essentially guest appear in season 3 for several episodes. And there's definitely certain elements of the dialogue where you can kind of feel it almost kind of mirrored a reality in a way, especially if you go and read about what Roy Scheider's problems with the show was. And apparently Roy Scheider later apologized for some of the stuff that he said about the show. He kind of bashed the show a little bit during its second season. Overall was actually pretty well written. So that's Equilibrium at number 9. And then at number 8, we have Weapons of War. For a final episode, honestly, even though this doesn't really work as a proper finale to the series, it is a pretty great action-packed episode for the show to go out on, and one of the main characters actually does die in it. So it actually is a pretty exciting episode for the series to end on, but again, it doesn't really wrap things up in a way that you would like to. It very much kind of leaves things open, but for a final episode, I thought that this was a pretty great one. So that's Weapons of War at number 8. And then at number 7, we have The Last Lap at Luxury. It is about a special conference at an underwater resort where Lucas as well as several world leaders end up getting kidnapped. Honestly, for me, I find that a lot of the best episodes of Seaquest were actually the ones that didn't really deal with any particular sort of science fiction themes. They were just very much, well written, well paced, exciting stories that happen to take place in this science fiction world. This episode is definitely one of them. Make use of a lot of the sort of fictional politics of this world, which I personally dig, and it actually does have a pretty decent little twist ending that I honestly didn't see coming the first time I saw it. So that's The Last Lap at Luxury at number 7. And then at number 6, we have Greed for a Pirate's Dream. This one follows the crew trying to convince a group of treasure hunters on an abandoned island that if they don't seize their operations quickly, they will die in a volcanic eruption, as they are trying to find this secret pirate's treasure that's meant to be buried somewhere in the area. Again, another one that doesn't really have a ton of science fiction elements to it. And this being, primarily a water-based, underwater sea adventure show, it does make sense that, you're going to have some episodes that deal with, pirates, treasures, and things. But this kind of does it in a way that doesn't feel super cliche, if that makes sense. It has a lot of tragic elements to it, but it also is a pretty satisfying ending as well. So that's Greed for a Pirate's Dream at number 6. And then at number 5, we have Daggers. This was the Season 2 opener, the 2-hour Season 2 opener, I might add. And essentially this was where it started to retool the show after they moved the entire production from Universal Studios in Hollywood to Universal Studios in Florida. Yes, because once upon a time, Universal Studios Florida actually was a partially working studio that they later kind of abandoned to just kind of focus on it being a theme park attraction. These genetically engineered soldiers who essentially escape from a UAO prison colony. Very much a Star Trek-y kind of a story in a way. And for me personally, as a Star Trek fan, I really dig that. But again, the Daggers themselves that they would be introduced would actually do several stories throughout the second and third season. One of them, by the name of Dagwood, actually ends up becoming a member of the crew of the Seaquest. So it's actually the only episode from season 2 that I have on the list. Not to say I thought season 2 was terrible, but I just thought, of all the episodes of the show, there wasn't a lot of like the truly great ones in season 2 in my opinion. Reinventing the show a little bit while still kind of carrying a lot of the elements that worked in season 1, which again, there can be some argument of how much of that they kind of kept throughout season 2, but overall, I mean, again, that like I said, that this is just a really, really solid, good opener to the season, and in my opinion, one of the best episodes of the series. So that's Daggers at number 5. And then at number 4, we have Treasure of the Mind. This one follows the Seaquest discovering an annex of the Great Library of Alexandria being discovered, with many nations then sending their fleets to claim its treasures, with Bridger and the crew trying to figure out how to essentially negotiate with them. Honestly, the show was a lot of the time at its best when it would do stuff like this. It was sort of, dealing with these kinds of, they were kind of science fiction ideas, but they weren't sort of like traditional science fiction ideas. They were kind of like, in the future, what if you discovered, these ancient artifacts by exploring the ocean and stuff like that. And I personally really dig, stuff about like ancient civilizations and stuff like this. So this was kind of one of those stories where it felt like this even now it kind of feels like it's the type of thing that could actually happen in the future, where or even you could argue has happened in some cases. It's almost a shame that they didn't do more stories like this, and that they kind of moved away to do the more traditional science fiction stories in the second season. So that's Treasures of the Mind at number 4. And then at number 3, we have Night of Shadows. This one actually did air on Halloween originally, and it essentially is very much a sort of Halloween special of the show. It essentially has the Seaquest finding a 100-year-old sunken ship. They actually interact with some of the spirits of those deceased. It's definitely one of the more, especially when it comes to the first season, out there sort of science fiction, and even horror-based elements of the show. And personally for me, I mean, for some people, they might not really dig this episode because, again, it is dealing with, actual spirits and things. But for me, as somebody who happens to be, both a horror and science fiction fan, this is easily, one of my personal favorite episodes of the show. Just dig the whole sort of atmosphere, look, and feel of this one. It's Night of Shadows at number 3. And then at number 2, we have Higher Power. This episode was the finale to the first season, essentially about the world being threatened by an unstoppable rise in the ocean temperature, which will melt the polar ice caps with lava seeping into the ocean, so the Seaquest essentially is the only thing that can actually save the world. The show itself always felt like almost like a spiritual successor to Irwin Allen's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and this episode in a lot of ways actually kind of is very similar to the Voyage of the Bottom of the Sea movie, where essentially the Seaquest in this case is the one thing that has to save the world. They have to make this perilous journey. Awesome epic way to end off the first season, and unfortunately this was the last time that we would see several of the main characters on the show, as they would not return when it moved its production to Florida in the second season. So it's a pretty awesome one. I really dig it. So that's Higher Power at number 2. And then finally at number 1, we have the pilot episode, To Be or Not to Be, which is also the longest episode of the entire series. It practically feels like a movie, honestly, and it's the one episode that I've watched the most. There's not a lot of shows where I would honestly say that, you know, the very first episode, the pilot episode, is the best episode of the whole show. Most shows, you know, a lot of the times the first episode is the weakest one, because that's kind of where they're trying to set things up. And there's actually been a lot of shows that I've watched in recent years where I found the first episode to be kind of weak, and then it kind of, you know, picks up later on as they're kind of working out certain aspects of the show. It starts getting its footing more. But Seaquest Dsv is one of those shows where right out of the gate it started really strong. Fortunately, again, because of that, you know, I find that the rest of the series a lot of the times didn't really live up to the greatness that was kind of set up and promised in the pilot episode. So again, I know for a lot of people they probably would not consider the pilot episode to be their favorite. That's the to be or not to be the pilot episode at number 1. So there we go, guys. That was my list of my top 10 personal favorite episodes of Seaquest Dsv. Feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know what your personal top 10 favorite episodes of Seaquest Dsv are. And yeah, so until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.